When you are there at council, first of all, I have so much respect for councillors. They have the hardest job in the world and they get the least amount of credit. They are closest to the action, but they are probably the most powerful players on the provincial scene.
A free press protected under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms exists to inform the public and hold institutions accountable.
Neighborhood Works and the food banks, they're going to receive papers that say that these people receive service at those places, and they can use those as their home address.
Welcome to This Week Uncut, where we take a look at the week's top stories from CHCO-TV and The Courier. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth.
We begin this week with a conversation for Southwest New Brunswick, a panel of local experts and former and current leaders talking about the elections in May.
Yeah, it was really great to team up with the Southwest New Brunswick Service Commission to do something before nomination papers were due. So we've never done anything this early in election season. So it was great. Hollis Bartlett came to us with the idea of doing a webinar that we then turned over for television. That way people could ask questions live here in the studio to the panel that we put together. Obviously, it was a pleasure to co-host with you. It was a lot of fun, a big night, busy atmosphere in this very room. We had Jim Higgins here from Elections New Brunswick to answer those very specific nomination paper questions that I think getting closer to the deadline, more and more people who are considering running or thinking about. Hollis Bartlett was here to talk about the Service Commission, and you're mostly over on the couch to speak with the former and current leaders not reoffering, to give perspective on running and what it means to serve, as well as the realities of serving office. Because I think sometimes, especially if you're new to the process but have thought about it, you might have a lot of questions about, you see a council meeting on television, but the true breadth of the role is much more than that.
Yeah, and it involves, several pieces of legislation. You think about the Local Governance Act, the Community Planning Act, there are other pieces of legislation that are more provincial, but also still fall, within the scope of these rural areas that we're dealing with now, right? Like, fire burning is different in a rural area than it is in an urban area. Property tax is different in an urban area than it is in a rural area. So there's complexities to being a local government. And I think what we heard mostly was about the commitment to service rather than maybe the intricacies of the processes and the legislation that you have to follow, but more about, the commitment that's required of people who are signing up and putting their name on the ballot.
Mm-hmm. What was neat too is that it was people who have served. So we're talking Frank Carroll, former mayor of Macadam, 35 years experience. It's pretty huge. And also that career covers changing times as well, right? Especially when we look at today and what a politician might have to deal with when it comes to misinformation, the digital age, social media platforms. All these things have changed over the decades. You also had Ghislaine Wheaton from the current deputy mayor of the municipal district of St. Stephen, who's not offering. She's done a lifetime of service, also a former teacher, and Jim Tubbs from Rural District Number 10 to talk about that role as well. And I can't forget Andrea Anderson-Mason, former Minister of Justice, MLA for Fundy the Isles, St. John West, when it was still called that, which really isn't that long ago, here to talk about that relationship between the province and municipalities and how they interconnect and overlap and ultimately sometimes fight for the same things.
And we don't want to forget that Andrea Anderson-Mason was also the Minister of Regional Development Corporation, the Regional Development Corporation, every municipality's favorite department, because it is where project money originates from. And so the minister responsible for that department is the one who gets to hear about all the projects and gets to be the one that decides. And she talked a lot about, driving by some of the projects that she's been a part of being able to bring to fruition in St. John West and in and along Charlotte County. And the province and municipal governments have to work really closely together because, we didn't get super deep into it, but there is a lot of crossover nowadays in their mandates when it comes to housing, homelessness, healthcare, education, because we're sort of started seeing the lines of that mandate blur a little bit, but you need each other to produce the best outcomes for your constituents.
Yeah, that's something obviously we hear at this outlet a lot, right? Sometimes you'll hear, oh, that's not a municipal duty. This is not a provincial mandate, these kind of things. But when you're in a part of our region, we know the realities of that. They're going to work together. Oftentimes journalists are reaching out to multiple levels of government just to see everyone's piece of the pie, right? And what everyone's bringing to the table and how they are connecting to me. Look at something like the Wharf project here in St. Andrews that does require all those levels of government to cooperate in some level. So Andrea, I think, spoke really well to that, but she was also able to speak to that call of duty in this part of the world, no matter what you're representing Southwest New Brunswick.
She had a great answer for the question about, about working together, right? She said, sometimes, in a marriage, your husband does the dishes and you do the cooking, but you both, sometimes you have to do the dishes and the cooking. It just depends on, the circumstances around that issue. And I think that was a great answer, right? Yeah. This idea of finger pointing gets the process lost, right? Yep. You lose the process when you're pointing your fingers back and forth at each other instead of trying to figure out ways to work together to produce the best outcome. But that is a tale as old as time in politics, pointing fingers from one level to the other or to one side or the other, I guess, in certain cases.
I think, and to give people at home a real concrete example of something like that, because we're speaking a little bit abstract right now, but things like homelessness, right? Things like housing that you might think, oh, that's a provincial mandate. Nevertheless, same with healthcare. We've seen municipalities time and time again, especially now when we're strained in all kinds of different ways, but there are things like the housing crisis hitting us in rural parts of the country in very real ways. Homelessness hitting rural parts in very real ways where communities can't just say, that's a provincial mandate. We have to step up. These are our neighbors. So regardless of whose mandate, let's work together.
And advocates will tell you that there are things that municipalities can be doing on these issues, right? That do fall in within their scope. Like when advocates talk about housing, they're talking about removing red tape, removing barriers to development, offering development incentives at the local level, which is happening here in Charlotte County. Think about Compass Housing, think about the dock apartments in St. Stephen. So there are things that you can do. Housing is not your mandate, but there are processes that are involved that the municipality can do and take charge of. And even in St. Stephen, and they're incredibly proud of this, is that they've developed an incentive program for doctors, right? There's I think $100,000 a year, and they offer that a certain amount of money out of that pool of money to a doctor for a certain time commitment. And that is a very effective way to attract doctors, right, is incentives. But they've also, Councillor Emily Rodas and Deputy Mayor Ghislaine Wheaton have really concentrated on, showing the doctors that are coming here and their families why living in St. Stephen is the right decision, because they're trying to incorporate their children. They're trying to show them the schools and the after-school programs and the sports programs, right? It's about integrating into a community. So while it might not seem like a big thing that they're doing, it is, because that doctor may now settle roots in that community and will have a thriving practice for 10 or 30 years, depending on how it operates. And the collaborative care model also helps with that, because they're not going to be as stressed out all the time.
This is why, I love to point this out to our viewers at home, this is why we were able to lure Nathalie to leave a national news outlet to come here to Charlotte County. I think it's an important point to stress, because you love municipal politics. I can't even love them to the level at which you love it. It's impressive, it's inspiring, because that's where the real work happens. And it's a very beautiful thing about my co-host. So I want to point this out again and again every time I can. She left global news to come here to cover local, hyper-local news. And I think that speaks to the importance of these roles themselves. While our job is to scrutinize and to look into the details of everything that happens to make sure process is followed, to also inform our community about the great things that are happening too. Nevertheless, it comes with us having a lot of respect for these roles, right? And the impact they can have on your community, on the lives of your neighbors. This is really important work, and the ones that we see day to day. Sometimes these politicians, unfortunately, are the ones that maybe get the most comments on Facebook because it's very real, the work they're doing. You see it in your community. But it's a role that I'm incredibly impressed by. So many people have become my heroes over the years because of the ways they've innovated for their community, stepped up in challenging times, found ways when we didn't think there was one, and it happens at a municipal level.
And municipal government is truly the government closest to the people. There, you might get a scheduled time to speak with the Premier. Think about Premier Susan Holt visits to Honeybeans a few weeks ago. But this is the government you see at the grocery store. This is the government that is also happens to be at your child's school play. This is the government that is your neighbor. And so everything that gets decided at that level is very important. Your water quality lays at the feet of municipalities because they're in charge of the infrastructure that gets the water from the treatment plant to your tap, right? And municipalities are struggling in New Brunswick. There's no doubt about that in terms of their infrastructure gaps, right? We know there's like a $200 million gap in the amount of infrastructure needs that they have versus the money that they get. Right, and we're still sort of learning about how the province is going to work on fiscal reform, which is one thing, and then also the diversification of revenue streams for municipalities also has to be part of the discussion. So money coming from other revenue streams that the province has access to, the federal government has access to, that municipalities don't, because their pool of money explicitly comes, 80% of it comes from property tax. So when your property tax goes up, your municipality is responsible for that.
And that was what was so great about this live webinar, was that people could really ask anything they wanted to, whether it was a demystification of the relationship between the province and municipalities, or how the municipalities work within the Service Commission to make things happen regionally, whether you had a question for Elections New Brunswick about voting or getting your papers in or campaigning on the trail, because those rules are different too from provincial to federal. So it was a really illuminating night, one I'm really proud to have been a part of. We put it on TV and YouTube after. It has, for something of that nature, to have as many views as it does on YouTube and as much feedback as we've heard come in from people who watched it on TV, I think it's something that we'll likely do again and again, because it was giving people information before they even had the, to decide to run means a lot. And we're seeing some new faces this time around come out to run. So I think that it had an impact. One part that was particularly interesting to people like us journalists was your presentation at the end. You did a presentation about the role of media when it comes to dealing with politicians on the local level, and how our role equally is about buttressing democracy, that we play a role together in serving the community. So not to see us as an enemy, but to see us just really a test of what you're doing, right?
A lot of municipalities are not fortunate enough to have a newspaper in their backyard.
Right.
We know that newspapers exist across the province, owned by Post Media. The River Valley Sun, another independent newspaper in Woodstock, but not every community has a newspaper, or for that matter, a licensed broadcaster in their backyard.
No, that's why we can give a shout out to Teresa Blackburn at the River Valley Sun, because there's just so few independent small news outlets left that, like, Teresa, we love what you do. Keep it up.
The eVisit MB story was broke by the River Valley Sun.
Yeah.
So this, the journalism that we're experiencing in Charlotte County is not that it's new or unique, but it is needed. So I think it was important to explain to folks how that works and what the process looks like.
Yeah, and one thing that I have the opportunity, since we are on this topic right now, and we're going to take a look at some of your presentation because I think it bears repeating, is just that media is here to help out the community as well, to illuminate what's going on. If you had rewound, let's say even 10 years, but let's say 20, you would see a healthier media landscape, not just across this country, but around the world. It's eroding fast on the local level. Canada's been hit by the Facebook and Instagram news block imposed by Meta. That means that was really the last nail in the coffin for the Courier when it was owned previously by others in Nova Scotia. I mean, that's what led us to buying the paper, was to save it. It had to come from caring about this community, restructuring it as a nonprofit. We know news doesn't make money, but we believe it's it's still, we can survive this, but it takes a lot of heart. And that's why you don't see news outlets left really across the country in small communities like this, and why we are desperately hanging on to this one and making sure we don't lose it, is because we understand the role it plays in democracy. And the sad thing is, I'm going to go on a rant for a minute. The sad but silver lining thing at the same time is I'm proud of what we're able to do here in our role in the democratic process as well. But I hope that this becomes a model for other communities, whether they call us and want to find out how do we create something like this for our community, because I think we are holding up democracy on our end in a really important way. So I'm going to let you take it from here.
Sure. And before we throw to my presentation, news is not a business, it's a public service,
Yes.
and we need to reframe how people
Yes.
think about journalism. Take a listen to my presentation during the local conversation with Southwest New Brunswick. In smaller communities especially, local journalism matters more than ever. At the Courier, we're now part of a nonprofit model through CHCO-TV, which has been serving this region since 1993. That model exists because local news is shrinking across the country, but the need for it isn't. You may also deal with outlets like CBC, CTV Atlantic, Global News, the Telegraph Journal, and All New Brunswick. Each outlet works a bit differently, but the expectations of you remain the same. The most common interaction you'll have with the media is in interview requests. There's a few things you should know. You may be contacted directly, even if your municipality has a spokesperson. Interviews are often recorded, that's for accuracy, and yes, you may be called on short notice. But here's the key advice. If you don't know something, say so. If you need time, ask for it. But don't ignore requests. Silence is still a response, and it often becomes part of the story. Most interviews are fairly quick, about 15 to 20 minutes. But if you're doing a longer format like a sit-down or TV segment, it could be an hour or more. If you're doing virtual interviews, make sure you're clearly visible. Avoid sitting in front of bright windows or white walls. Dress for the situation and treat it like a formal setting, because it is. Now, off the record doesn't mean I said it casually. It means the information cannot be published, but only if that is agreed upon beforehand. You cannot say something and then decide after the fact it was off the record. And even then, a journalist may still verify that information independently. On background means information can be used, but not attributed to you by name. If you're ever unsure, ask before you speak. As a municipal official, you are subject to the Right to Information and Protection of Privacy Act. This means records, emails, documents, communications may be requested. And the reality is almost everything can potentially be accessed. Avoiding or delaying compliance isn't optional, and it can lead to investigations by the Ombudsman or reputational damage. So a good rule of thumb is write and communicate as if it could become public, because it just might. Here are some of the biggest mistakes that I see. Often, coverage will be taken too personally. Not every critical story is an attack. Negative coverage often reflects reality, not biased. There can be also an effort to try and control the narrative. You don't decide what gets covered, journalists do. There also might be an inclination to favor certain outlets. All media should be treated fairly, regardless of coverage. There also can be a desire to go to social media instead of answering questions. That often escalates situations instead of resolving them. Social media is a powerful platform carrying considerable influence and credibility when content is shared directly by a politician. Which is why, if you're using this platform to communicate, it needs to be backed by verified facts. Two versions of the story, that's how trust gets broken. Being responsible on your platform means thinking twice before taking shots at policy, people, or the press. Take, for example, information shared by US President Donald Trump through social media. Do you often find yourself going to a credible news source to verify what he says? Probably, because there is a reason for you to think it might not be true. That's why trusted news organizations are what the public will turn to. The journalism industry is regulated, just like any other credible industry, just like food quality from a restaurant or your grocer, and building codes for your critical infrastructure. Your house won't fall down, and you can cross a bridge safely. Journalism has standards and practices that help ensure the public trust. But this is something that happened right here in Charlotte County. Premier Susan Holt recently told journalists that U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement were at the callous border. It turned out she had seen the information on social media and then had to publicly correct herself. Sometimes you may find yourself saying no comment too often. It creates more questions than answers. No comment often creates ambiguity. Ambiguity is something the public will not stand for. Here's what does work. Be transparent even when it's uncomfortable, be available even when it's inconvenient, be accurate even when it's complicated, and correct errors professionally, with evidence and not emotion. Most importantly, engage in good faith. You don't have to agree with the coverage, but you do have to respect the role of the press. If you take one thing away from this, I hope it is this. Your relationship with the media will shape how the public understands your work. You don't need to be perfect, but you do need to be open, honest, and accountable. Because at the end of the day, both our roles serve the same people, the public. That was my presentation as part of the conversation for Southwest New Brunswick's on the local elections and the relationship between municipal government and local media.
We are going to take a quick break, but when we come back, I sit down with Chief Electoral Officer of New Brunswick, Kim Poffenroth.
I think sometimes people underestimate and don't entirely appreciate the responsibilities and decisions made by their local councils.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon. So the Chief Electoral Officer of Elections New Brunswick came to sit down with you and talk about these elections that are fast approaching.
Fast approaching. Kim Poffenroth, yes, she's an incredible woman. She's been here multiple times. Actually, she was one of my first interviews when I started working here, and I can't remember if it was a federal election. I'm trying to go way back to when I started working here. So Chief Electoral Officers, just for fun, just to tell you at home, they do 10-year terms. So this is getting towards the end of her term. So I feel like I've known her for a really long time. I've been here 8 years. I've known her the whole time. So she's great for a sit down before an election because she demystifies everything, not just for the candidates, but for the voters as well. So the reason we really wanted to have this conversation is because, great, we did the webinar. Exciting to see that there's going to be so many races across Southwest New Brunswick, not just for mayors, but for council seats as well. And that actually, I spoke with Poffenroth about this, that your turnout for people voting is actually higher when you have both a mayor and council candidate. Sometimes people tend to think that the mayor is the important role to vote for, and if you just have to vote for council, oh, who cares, right? And this is a terrible thing to think because council are actually the ones that have a lot of power, that vote on the decisions. The mayor's only there as a tiebreaker and to be, to take the lead on things, but the councilors are the ones that vote. So it's demystifying that part too for voters, why it's still important to go out even if you're just voting for council and the mayor is acclaimed. We also talked about acclamation and that kind of impact as well, and how voters are able to do early voting or if they have challenges and are homebound or even homeless. So that was something that was new to our conversation as well, is how do you vote if you don't have an address?
If you think that voter turnout is low during a provincial or federal election, you should take a look at municipal elections, local elections. It's very low. And it stems, I think, a lot from the misunderstanding that these elections are actually very consequential. And, she said in 2021, there were 11 or 12 councils that were entirely acclaimed because there was only one candidate for each position. And so that isn't democracy, right? You're not choosing your local leaders, you're putting them into place because they're the only ones that ran. And that's not because, these people have done something that these acclaimed individuals have stepped up, but it's because other people haven't. And that could be for a variety of different reasons. We don't really know what those reasons are. But when it comes to, seeing multiple names on the ballot, it does encourage people to vote because those people are going to be knocking on doors. They're going to have signs on people's lawns. They're going to, be at the local coffee shop taking questions, right? So there's an engagement level when there are more candidates in the same way that there would be at the provincial level, because the provincial candidates knock on your door, the federal candidates knock on your door, right? They need to engage you in order to be elected. And I think at the local level, there's not as much of that, because there are situations where candidates get acclaimed, so they get a bit comfortable. But that is that's the process that we're talking about there. So certainly there will be acclamations. We know we think potentially there could be some acclamations in Charlotte County. So we're just waiting on what that looks like on May 11th.
We are going to have, I'm looking forward to, and we are setting dates already, and I'll talk about that a little later in the show for our Meet the Candidates nights. That'll be later, another section of the show tonight. But I have set one for St. Stephen already. We've set one for Eastern Charlotte. We'll get into specifics later, because we love to be able to inform you not just about the mayors that are running, but when the councillors are, when there is an election too. It's so important for you to hear from the people who are going to be making those votes, so you can decide who will be the people in power around the entire table, not just the mayor. And I think there's a big misconception around that. So we talked about that right at the top of the show, and what that means and why as a voter you should care. But we also talked about the logistics of voting and how easy you can do it, whether it be at home, what you need to bring, where returning offices are, things like of that nature too, just the very specifics. So really, there's no excuse. If you watch the show, you will know how to vote. You will also know a lot of the rules if you're a candidate when it comes to campaigning, because it's a little different. Obviously, there's a lot of grassroots stuff at the municipal level. But again, the whole point of these shows is to show people not how easy it is to run and get word out there. If you are a candidate and you're a first-time candidate and you might be a little unfamiliar with the territory and feel that maybe you feel naive to the process, we wanted to demystify it for you altogether, but also for voters too. And not just how to vote, but why you should.
I think she made some really great points, and in her interview she talked about the fact that mayors don't vote. So the really important people that you should be thinking about and considering are your councillors. Who best aligns with your values and what you want from your elected leaders, and what direction you want your community to take. The other thing she talked about, which I thought was really interesting, is this component of people who are unhoused. I think there's a lot of questions about how that process might work, and she told us that there's a form that they provide to the operators that can be filled out for those people, and they can use the shelter's address as their address for voting. So democracy doesn't mean that just because you don't have an address doesn't mean you can't participate. Everybody deserves the opportunity to participate. So I was quite relieved to see that they've come up with a process for the folks who are unhoused.
And we used St. Stephen as an example when we were, when there was a head count of how many people were unhoused. We know that was between 70 and 100 people in a town of just thousands. That's quite a large amount of people, especially when we know homelessness is one of the key issues driving voters to the polls in St. Stephen. So shouldn't the people most affected by it also have a voice? So she explained how.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen it at the federal level. I think there's a riding in Quebec that was decided by one vote, but that is even more common in municipal elections. We're not talking about hundreds of votes. We're talking about maybe dozens of votes that are going to decide between this candidate and that candidate. So if someone wants to vote and there's an obstacle, but they have every right to vote, that obstacle should be removed. It's just how democracy works.
If we have done our jobs, and I really hope we have, I'm really hoping to see great voter turnout across Southwest New Brunswick. I hope I see it across the whole province, but just because we focus on this area, I hope we see that we've really driven home the message that every vote does matter. It's very easy to do. There are multiple ways to do it. May 11th is election day, but you can do it so many ways before that too. So watch the whole show and it will demystify things for you, whether you watch it on television. I'm making it so easy. Either watch it on TV, it's on Town and Province, or just go to YouTube. It's there now.
And I would like to point out that the Courier will be offering candidate profiles as well as part of our overall coverage. That those will have, I believe, 5 or 6 questions in each profile. There's a separate one for councillors and a separate one for mayors. if you have provided your contact information to Elections New Brunswick, you will get that candidate or mayoral questionnaire directly. If you haven't, you need to come to the website and provide us with that information so we can send it to you. We will also publish those questionnaires online so that if someone who hasn't provided their contact information can also access it and send it. Those candidate profiles will not be published in the Courier just because of the nature of its publication schedule.
The print
Edition, yep. And failure to participate in the questionnaire process does not result in coverage later on, and it's not that format is not exclusive to any other formats that are produced by CHCO-TV or the Courier. So we've got a lot going on, and I'm hopeful that everyone will engage and will participate.
And I said I'd say later in the show, I probably will go over this again later in the show since I'm covering more the TV end of this, but we'll be co-hosting a lot of this stuff. So far, these are the dates booked. We have April 20th for Eastern Charlotte. That will be both mayoral and candidate nights, and I will have more information on time and place. I'm working with the Eastern Charlotte Chamber of Commerce on deciding where we will hold it. It'll depend on obviously how many of the candidates are willing to go. So these things all matter when we are trying to figure out the logistics. So just be patient. I'm giving you the date now so you can mark it off in your calendars, April 20th. If there's a change for any reason, I will let you know too. April 25th is what we have booked for St. Stephen. That was the first one I booked because they were definitely going to have a mayoral race and a council race. So St. Stephen, you have April 25th, and I have the location. It's the Garceland Civic Center. Okay, I do not have the time yet. All those things are coming out. It might be out by the time you're watching this, so check, at the very least, call the station, check my Facebook page. We will be putting this everywhere. But these nights are being booked now. There's a candidate race in St. Andrews. We will have one too. Grand Manan as well. So stay tuned. It's all coming.
I'm so glad that so many municipalities have that green election flag right next to it. This is going to be a good year for municipal politics because we heard a lot about, from a lot of elected officials that they were nervous that people weren't going to participate because of some of the harassment and abuse that local leaders are now facing, which has, seeped into social media and in person for that matter, right? And I'm so relieved to see that people have decided, in spite of that issue, that growing issue, that they are still willing to put their name on the ballot and put their names forward, which is an incredible sacrifice on their part to be part of public life.
I know, and I think that and maybe it's with bigger outlets that are less local. I think there's this idea that journalists are there's this get you culture, but truthfully, I feel for politicians when they're subjected to harassment on social media because we feel it ourselves. There are many times, I know that we're loved by the community and I feel that, but you've seen, if you do follow me on Facebook, you've seen what we're subjected to at times. I've learned to have as thick skin as I can. It doesn't mean it's not damaging. It does have effects on your mental health. So I totally understand what they're going through. Even though I've had years experience of being in the public eye, there are moments that are threatening. There are moments where maybe you're having an off day or someone hits that Achilles heel. Maybe it's, when someone insults your looks for no reason. There's a lot of things people do that are just inappropriate online, and I hope as a community we can somehow come together to be better than that. It's hard when algorithms factor in to everyone's life and interrupt our collective psyche that way by feeding people information that stirs them up. Nevertheless, there's no excuse for bad behavior.
Right.
Yeah.
Permission invites permission, really.
Right.
So we have to be careful when we're using certain platforms and when we are speaking about different individuals, whether they're in our community, members of the media, members of our government. We have to be very careful because that invites permission for other people to do it, and then it sort of devolves into things that are just not fair and totally inaccurate. So we've got to be careful.
I think it does anyone good to practice diplomacy online because it really actually, you'll find yourself in less issues when you yourself, even if you see people instigating something, just avoid it altogether or correct with facts. Correcting with facts always works, but I think this is going to be a topic we do all next year.
As Andrea Anderson Mesa put it, 3 strikes, you're out.
Yeah.
3 responses, you're done.
Post and ghost. I don't know. We'll talk about this. I think there's a whole social media segment, not just segment, series that we need to do. Nevertheless, I am getting off topic here. Here is a look at my interview with Chief Electoral Officer of New Brunswick, Kim Poffenroth.
So in those cases, if there's only enough candidates to fill the positions that are available, there won't be an election for those positions. So depending on the municipality somebody lives in, they might have an election for just some of the positions. It might be a district education council. It just depends. So we have to send out voter information cards to those who will have some sort of an election. There may be municipalities where everyone is acclaimed. That has happened in the past. I think in 2021 we had something along the lines of 11 or 12 perhaps where everybody was acclaimed. So that's what will happen in those cases. Unfortunately, we always find that there are some positions that not enough candidates come forward at all or none. And then if there are still vacancies, we'll hold by-elections in either October or November of this year to hopefully get some people to who've had, maybe a few extra months to consider, like, okay, I do want to contribute to my community.
Do you find that there's a difference? Sometimes there is an election for the mayor, but the council itself might be acclaimed. Does that decrease voter turnout?
A lot of the time, it's whether or not there's an election for mayor that really drives. But sometimes it depends on if there's some burning issue in the community, something that's going on that's driving people to the polls. But unfortunately, often if the position of mayor is the one that is acclaimed, that really does seem to suppress voter turnout regardless of whether or not there's a number of candidates running for other council positions. But it really varies quite a bit across the province. It's one of those things that's very, very hard to predict.
What do you tell people? I always stress that councils are the ones that vote. What do you tell people when it comes to getting voters to turn out, even if the mayor is acclaimed, to vote for the councillors?
Yeah, because I believe every municipality in this province, mayors only actually vote on issues if there's a tie. So it's actually your council representatives, your ward councillors, your councillors at large that are voting on the policy matters that come before council. And council sets the direction for the entire municipality for 4 years on things like recreation facilities, fire, policing services, water and sewer, sets the property tax rate. I mean, these are a lot of really important things that impact the residents of a municipality on a day-to-day basis. So I think if you want to ensure that your local council represents your view on where your municipality should be going, then it's important to get out and vote. And there's a lot of other issues that municipalities are picking up the torch on, because we have a lot of issues around homelessness, housing shortages, this sort of things, that even though they're not the responsibility of local governments, that they are taking on those because they realize it has a significant impact on the resources of a community and has impacts on policing and other services. So I think I think sometimes people underestimate and don't entirely appreciate the responsibilities and decisions made by their local councils.
That was Chief Electoral Officer of New Brunswick, Kim Poffenroth.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about the early start to fire season and some New Brunswick service fees that are going to increase this summer. Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth.
We had a few stories this week, although it was relatively quiet, I think, on the news side. But the week before was incredibly busy with all of the government announcements in Charlotte County, so I was a bit relieved that it was a bit of a slower week. But there were a few things that were of note, including the early start of fire season, wildfire season, fire watch season, I guess you could call it.
Well, I know that anyone who follows the Courier regularly, CHCO as well, knows that you have dedicated a lot of your time to covering fires extensively, including looking back at the Stein Lake fire that I think everyone from this region remembers, and doing a retroactive analysis of what happened.
Yeah, I think they learned, the government of New Brunswick learned a lot from the Stein Lake fire, and I even asked the minister about that. During the start of wildfire season last year, before we had, over 200 fires that happened last summer, and he said we took a lot of the information that we got from that after action report, and now it's informing how we're responding to fires that are happening now. And you would have noticed that during the Stein Lake fire there was no alert ready, but there was a lot of them during the fires that happened this past summer. So there has been progression in learning on how to respond to these fires, what communication needs to be happening, what levels of government need to be involved, who needs to be involved, and wildfires are not new or unique, but they are sort of getting to be more of a problem in Atlantic Canada. So we're sort of starting to develop our process on how we deal with those and how we respond to them.
And again, Silent Blaze was a 2-part series you did last year for the Courier that really looks into the Stein Lake fire and what we can learn from that situation. So anyone who wants to read that, it's worth going to the website and looking it up for that extensive and wonderful reporting that you did. I'm going to show how naive I am to forest fires, even though I've covered them as well. I was hoping this year meant, with all the snow we had this winter, that would have a positive impact on forest fire season. But I asked you that when you came out of the conference, and you had more to tell me.
Yeah, so for a group of a population of people that deals with winter every year, we're very we like to complain about the snow. However, there wasn't a lot of snow. It might have seemed like a lot because last winter we didn't have a lot. We had a lot more rain than we had snow. And the thing to remember is that when it is snowing, the ground is frozen. So it's not that moisture is not being absorbed in the same way that it would be in the spring. So when the snow is also not lasting as long, so it is melting before the ground completely unfreezes. So not only did we not have enough snow, it sort of melted before the ground became unfrozen. Before that, there was record low precipitation, and we are still in drought conditions. Even though it's April, we're in a drought. And so you would have seen last year a lot of communities ask people to conserve water, don't wash your car, think twice about doing a separate load of laundry, like all of these things. And we know that this is going to become the new normal, because we know that dry conditions will outpace precipitation rates. So it's going to become part of the fabric of what New Brunswickers have come to know in the way that they've known hurricanes and tropical storms and wintertime storms. So it's going to be a new regular season. I will say that the government has invested more money into the Department of Natural Resources to directly respond to wildfires, including converting 74 forest rangers from seasonal to full-time positions. So that will not only provide more coverage across the province, but also firefighting efforts as well. They've also extended a contract with a company in Fredericton that provides the Fireboss aircraft, which is an aircraft that's capable of drawing up about 3,000 or more liters in about 15 to 30 seconds. A great asset to have in the air when you're fighting a large forest fire. So they've done some things, and FireSmart has launched 3 weeks before Firewatch and FireSmart has launched 3 weeks before it traditionally has. So it means that they're ready and they're watching, and they think that this is going to start and kick off a lot earlier than expected.
Oh, wow. I know those fire programs are so important for anyone to attend if you can, if they're holding one at your fire hall, at your local fire hall, and anytime there is one, I will be sure to let the community know in our area, because there are things you can do for your own property to make sure it's as protected as it could be, even if it just means cutting down certain trees, if they're in a certain range of something, things like that, that we all have to to be really proactive about, especially when you live in a beautiful rural area such as this. I mean, I think when people think back to fires we've had and the damage you can still see decades later, it takes a lot away as well.
I mean, it's as simple as not having your wood pile, within a certain number of feet of your house, right? It's literally that simple. And all of those tools are available online, and I would encourage people to go to FireSmart on the GMB. It is a joint federal and provincial program, so you could get all kinds of resources at the federal level and at the provincial level. It's very important that you read up, especially if you live in a rural area, because we sort of tend to focus on urban areas because that is where a wildfire has the capacity to do the most damage, which we have seen, in the western United States and even in our neighbors in Nova Scotia.
Oh gosh.
So you have to be prepared. It's going to happen. So moving your firewood pile away, making sure you have a buffer around your home so that kindling is not close to your home because it's going to be dry and it's going to be capable of catching fire.
There's a part I think anyone who lives in this area knows. Whenever I drive through Bocabec, there is an area that many of us who we were reporting on the Stein Lake Fire, yourself included, when you're at Global, there was a home that all around it, the motorcycle got burned. I think melted.
It was melted.
Someone was building a smaller area, and I think his tent melted. There was all these things. The home didn't melt though. The home didn't catch fire. But you see it now, and every time I drive by, you just feel how long the recuperation is, even though you still see a home standing. All the forest around it, all the regrowth, and yes, it comes, but I think that's going to sit with me for a lifetime.
And that gentleman actually watered around his house, right? He took a hose and he watered down the siding and he watered down a buffer line. And really at the end of the day, that's only going to do so much because it's not going to penetrate the ground. The other thing that's really important to note is that you need to be watching for burn conditions. So burn conditions, this year is a very popular time of year for people to burn their grass or burn debris or burn old material. There are certain things that you shouldn't be burning at all, but it is certainly a time. And so every day, the burn conditions are updated at 2 o'clock. So if it's green, you're good to burn. If it's yellow, it means only between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. If it's red, you are not allowed to burn anything. And the other thing to watch for is because the ground is so dry, if you are burning and the conditions are green, you need to be careful to watch that it doesn't seep below the visual space of the fire. So if it gets into the ground, it can burn for days under the ground and then at some point come up and reach for oxygen, and then it can cause a wildfire. It's as simple as that. You might not know, you might think, oh, I've got it all the way out, but you don't have it all the way out. So when in doubt, be extra cautious. If you don't have to burn, don't burn, because this is going to be a really volatile forest fire season, at least according to every metric of data that we have access to at the moment.
Okay, well, hopefully we can be as prepared as we can, and then there are obviously factors outside of control. So.
Yeah, so there's a few other things that are also going on. There is a group of residents in St. Stephen that have decided to ask for a judicial review of the decision of the Municipal District of St. Stephen, and a motion made by Councillor Mark Harding to move the shelter outside of the municipal boundaries.
Is that something that can be done?
If you go online and read the Telegraph story, it will show you that there is precedent that has been set there. That is probably something that is not going to happen because there was a judicial review sought in the case of a Fredericton transitional housing project, I believe. And so there is precedent that exists there. The judge will make a decision, right? And we don't know what that decision will ultimately be. But there were affidavits that were filed about, a lot of the things that we discussed about in our story, right? The decline of quality of life in terms of those neighbors that have asked for this judicial review. The municipality, on the other hand, has done several things that the community has asked of it. They They formed a wellness task force, and I even recall, Marg giving an update on the first month after the task force had been created, and no one showed up, and they didn't have quorum. They had tried to establish a transitional housing project at 99 Union, which for different reasons, including that the municipality was worried about its own infrastructure there, it decided to reject that property. So there's steps that the municipality certainly and Neighborhood Works have taken to address the issue. The shelter will become permanent if you don't decide on the solution. And we know that the solution, data supports this solution, is transitional housing, to bring people into a space where they can feel safe, secure, and supported. And so that's where they're sort of at. So we will be following this story, and we will update you once we have an update on that judicial review.
I suggest anyone at home going to CHCO.TV. It's the easiest website to remember. It is just our television station name, and checking out that article. I think it has like well over 10,000 views. I think it's a topic obviously very complex, affecting many lives in the community. So it's worth a read, and I suggest everyone check it out. You said it wasn't a busy week in the newspaper, but it definitely was. I think you underplay that. So service is increasing in July. What can you tell me about that?
Well, first of all, busy is relative. I don't think it's busy because I'm usually busier. But several services, New Brunswick government services, are going to increase in July. And the reason for that is because this is part of that difficult decision conversation we had when we were discussing the budget on this show. The government has made further investment in justice and public safety, but they've also made substantial investment in healthcare, education, and so they have to do something to boost revenue, and so that's going to come at the cost of the modernization of several acts. The Liquor Control Act, the Gambling Act. Your driver's license is expected to increase, I think, annually. Your registration is about to go up by $5 to $15 a year, depending on your vehicle, obviously, because they determine that by weight. The ME 911 service fee will go up, not in July, but in August, in August, and it will go up to $2.39 as opposed to the 99-cent fee that you experience now. The other interesting one is St. Croix Progressive Conservative MLA Kathy Baucus drew to our attention was lotteries like Chase the Ace, which a lot of communities use to fundraise for their communities, will now be required to pay a 3% jackpot fee for anything over $1,700. So there's a lot of changes coming. The government's rationale is this is the price of the investments that we're making. This is the cost. This is the difficult decisions we warned you about, and that a lot of these fees have not been updated in the last 2 decades.
And thank you for watching. We're going to take a quick break, but we will be right back with what we are doing next week. Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon. We're going to look ahead to the only thing that we're going to be doing for the next several weeks, which is preparation and coverage of the municipal and local elections.
I do love it. I do love it. I really do. I mean, it's so much work, but it's so exciting. And it's so exciting to play a part in the democratic process, to really be there for your community, to be a platform for them to hear directly from their candidates. I never thought I'd say this, but it's really the most exciting work of my lifetime.
And I said that that's the only thing we will be focusing on, but I'm lying to you because while the local level may, sort of slow down and stop, making big decisions, news will happen elsewhere at other levels of government, so I will have to juggle both. But it's going to be interesting. There are a lot of people who have stepped up. We're going to have a lot of, questionnaires, and I would encourage voters to engage with the content that we're going to be producing over the next several weeks. If there is audience members, please come in person. Listen to these people. They have a reason for why they're going to be standing up there. And so they deserve your attention, and they deserve your time.
I think it's time, too, for just this moment where we as a community can really unite and say, we're going to be informed. We are going to hear from our candidate. We're going to approach this in a way where we can be leaders and show that there is diplomacy, show that there's civility, show that there's engagement, show that these things are still possible in this age that we're living in. If there's anyone that can do it, I know it's New Brunswickers, and even more than that, I know it's rural New Brunswickers. We're neighborly people. You know, we don't like to put up with things that we know aren't true and the like, but we can be civil, we can be neighborly, we can work this through. So I'm really hoping that through this process, through especially having you by my side, having the Courier and having all these layers of media right here, we can do our darndest to uphold democracy, and we know that the candidates will do their best too, and we invite the voters and the residents to just be a part of buttressing democracy at this time in the world when we see it challenged by so many different things.
Exactly. I'm really interested in the mayoral races. We've got some good ones. Grand Manan has, I think, 2 candidates. St. Stephen has 3. Eastern Charlotte has 2. St. Andrews has 3. And so I'm really interested because these are the people who will be elevated right to the highest level of local government. So I'm really excited to see how that goes. I'm most interested in that, and I'm looking forward to co-hosting these Meet the Candidates with you.
It's so much fun, and I think, you know, I want to end on this note by saying exactly that. When you look at the state of the world right now, it can be overwhelming. It can feel like you don't know how to move forward or what's even going to happen tomorrow. But there is a way to move forward, and it can be as simple as voting. But it can also be as simple as saying, I'm going to go hear from those candidates so I know exactly what I'm voting for. Or I'm going to go to the polls today just because I'm only voting for one ward and that's it, or my rural district representative, whatever it is. We can all be a part of the solution. And while these little moves seem small, they're incredibly significant, especially when we see things determined by one vote, especially when we see a small area can unite and if we can unite as a community and get everyone engaged as best we can be leaders in this chaotic world and show a way forward. And I believe small communities are the best places to do exactly that.
And I will say, your vote matters. Don't think that it doesn't. And if you don't vote, it's harder to make complaints later on in the process. Thanks for watching this week Uncut. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth.